Christian parenting.
Well, hey there, and welcome back to the Journey Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Pitts, and just really excited to share another story of God's rescue. You know, I've interviewed some people that are more well-known. I've interviewed others that are less well-known, and today I have an amazing story of God's rescue that might seem like a little bit more quote-unquote normal for many. I'm interviewing or having a conversation with my identical twin brother, Benjamin Pitts. Yes, I do have an identical twin brother. And, you know, we actually sound a lot alike. You may find it hard to differentiate between our voices, but our lives and our paths couldn't really be any more different other than our love for the Lord and our love for family. He and I have gone totally different paths, but Ben is a big part of my rescue story in my quote-unquote winter season when I lost Winter. I talk a little bit about that at the beginning of the podcast. But he has a story of his own of God's rescue, just like we all do. And what's interesting is I actually didn't know what Ben would define as his rescue story, and so it was fun to sit down with him and hear his story of rescue through the lens of a business guy with a entrepreneurial financial tech background that couldn't be any more different than my life, to hear how God has rescued him. And so I hope as you listen to his story today, there might be something in his story that you can resonate with and pick up for your own. There's some really compelling stuff that he says in regards to our relationship with God and the relational nature of the gospel, and just a few nuggets I think that you'll find really compelling. But it's a really good conversation. I really enjoyed entering into it myself, and I hope you enjoy listening in. Let's join the podcast now. So I'm sitting across this podcast mic from my identical twin brother, Benjamin Pitts, and we're sitting in Broomfield, Colorado. What are we, 20 miles north of Denver?
About 20, yep.
About 20 miles north of Denver, and been on a family vacation with my girls. It's been actually really beautiful, just retracing some steps from some previous family vacations that we took, and enjoying some time with family. And when I was sitting down trying to figure out who's my next podcast going to be with, I couldn't think of a better person than Ben. You know, if you're a ministry person or you listen to a lot of ministry podcasts, you're not going to have heard Ben on this podcast, because Ben's not necessarily quote unquote a vocational ministry guy. But Ben is a ministry guy, kingdom-minded guy, lover of God, lover of Jesus, and honestly, probably the best accountability partner, really the closest accountability partner I've had my whole life. He's always been the guy to keep me from getting in a fight. He was the guy that was keeping me from drinking when I was really young. He was the guy that was keeping me from doing a bunch of stuff. And here he is in, well, maybe not living color for you, but living color for me. Benjamin Pitts, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So you're not a traditional, call it ministry guy. You work in the world of finance, but when Winter passed away, so July 24th, 2018, my late wife Winter passed away. One of the first calls I think I would make, did I talk to you directly, or did I talk to some? Yeah,
directly.
Yeah. So one of the first calls I did make was to my twin brother, Benjamin Pitts. I don't remember now, but I would assumed it would have been like that. And all I know is it felt like 12 hours later. He was living in New Jersey at the time, and I don't know, but was it about 12 hours later?
Yeah, probably.
About 12 hours later, he was in my brother-in-law's living room, and there for me, meeting me in the middle of, like, not even my grief at that point, but just the darkness that I was in, having just lost Winter, and the sting of death when it's that close, and that we had no awareness that she was going to pass away. And so I found Ben there, and over the next, I guess, probably 10 days or more that he was there with me. Not only was he there by my side, helping with everything from the funeral and not getting ripped off by graveyards and all kinds of stuff, to I laugh now because it really was, it's kind of insane when you walk into that world. You don't realize everyone's kind of out for money, but
it's a business.
Yeah, it's a business. So he was also there for me. I literally couldn't sleep, and I wrote about this in my winter season in the book, that I couldn't sleep unless some part of my body was touching some part of his body. I didn't tell him that at the time, but we slept on an air mattress for most of that time. And I'll never forget the first night he was actually gone, and I had to go to sleep without having some physical contact with him. And it wasn't like this deep emotional thing as much as I think it was just a connection to somebody that you're really close to when you lose somebody else that you're really close to. And so anyway, yeah, I found him there, and I would say Psalm 34:7, the angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him, and he rescues them. And Ben would be a part of my rescue story, which I'm really grateful for. He's rescued me my entire life. That was probably the deepest part of the rescue. And anyway, I would say we've grown closer. I had a family. He would then begin his family, I don't know, 7 years after I started mine, I think. It was
So
a while after. So kind of, I wouldn't say we lost connection, but we definitely grew a little bit apart and have gotten a lot closer just through that. And so we're sitting here. But yeah, Ben, sorry, I welcomed you to the podcast and you haven't said a word yet. Why don't you just share a little bit about who you are, your family, and then we'll jump into the meat of the podcast.
Yeah, well, this is pretty much who we are because our entire lives, you've been the one that would talk, and I've been the one that would be quiet.
Carrying the conversation.
It's probably going to be an awkward podcast where John is the interviewer and the interviewee. But anyway, so I just moved here to Colorado 3 months ago today, actually. We picked up and moved on April 1st. We arrived here in Colorado, moved into an Airbnb, and it's quickly become home. We bought a home in Broomfield, Colorado, and I'm working in Boulder, Colorado. But just about me, I'm a husband to my wife, Leslie. Be 11 years next month. I'm a father to my daughters, Faith and Grace, who are 9 and 7, and my son, Benjamin Jr., who we refer to as Benny, who's 5.5.
Cutest thing you ever seen in your life.
Yeah, he's an interesting kid. From a family perspective, that's me. I love being a dad and hope that one day I can look back and say I'm as good of a father as we had. Working on that every day. But outside of that, from a life perspective and what I do every day, I'm in business and have been in business since finishing college, all the way back in 2002. But what brought us here to Colorado was about almost 8 years ago now. I started a technology business, the first technology business I'd ever been a part of, and it was fortunate enough to find a company that would buy that software about 4 months ago and bring me here to help build that business. So that's what I'm working on here. Frankly, this is a new season for us, and I would say that the last season for us was really close to a decade of me kind of starting an entrepreneurial journey and being being an entrepreneur can be a tough road, and I think for a lot of that time being in this period of sort of waiting on God to open doors, and He certainly did with this move to Colorado. So it's been a real blessing for me from a business perspective, but I would say even more than that, just for our family to have a fresh new start that's in a new place with new friends and new things to do and blue skies and no humidity. So
there you go.
Beautiful mountains.
Let me stop you real quick, because the one thing I do want to say is, and this is, I think, difficult for people at times to do. I'm guessing it's been difficult for you at times to do, is if you're not as a believer, you're not in vocational ministry, sometimes you don't feel like your life is necessarily connected to ministry. But I've always known for you that, you know your why. Sherman Smith, just did a podcast with him, he talked about knowing your why. And you've known your why. Like I know you've always had a passion, not even for finance necessarily. I mean, you have a financial planning company, you worked for Goldman Sachs, got a business degree and all that. Maybe finance is just where you worked it out. But you've always been ministry minded as you've gone along, knowing that people are really your mission, not the task themselves. So I'm just curious, how do you think about that? How would you talk about that on your road from where you were to where you are now? I'm just curious how you would even frame that up.
Yeah, I don't know. I think my perspective on it has probably changed pretty, I don't want to say dramatically, but changed over time as you mature and evolve as a person. I feel like at times early in my journey, and I'll probably talk about this in a little bit when we talk about what God has rescued me from, but at times I don't feel like I was living, waking up every day thinking that my life is some sort of ministry. And I'd say that's, back in my 20s and early 30s trying to find myself. I think anymore, I think I realized that I don't think this is very different for anyone who works even in ministry. Your life is just a ministry. I think what what speaks to people most times in your life is not always the things that you say, although that does matter. It's often the things that you do and the way that you live your life. And so, ultimately, I think what makes the world go round is the work that people do, and most of the people in this world are not in ministry. Therefore, most of the people in this world are not in church. And so, I think it certainly requires people that do know God and whose lives have been changed to show that change to the world around them. So I think for me, most days that's me just being me in an executive in a boardroom or in the meetings that occur throughout the day in a business, whether that's a startup or a large company. I think it's just the relationships that we build. I think God is a relational God and ultimately speaks to most of us through other people, whether it's, the two of us as twin brothers or, whether it's husbands and wives, fathers and children. It's a relational, Christianity is a relational religion. And so I think building relationships with people at work is just one of those ministries that has to happen. And you come across people and you experience, there's hurt and pain and loss that's all around you. And I think being there for people as those things are going on in their families and in their jobs and in their friendships is just an important work of the kingdom. So hopefully I'm doing my part each and every day and maturing at that each and every day.
Yeah, I think that's really beautiful what you said, and it's key. I think in America specifically, or in the West, we've made our lives so much about what we do rather than who we are. And so even in the faith, and I've done this for many years because I am in vocational ministry, I make my quote ministry about the content of what I'm creating. So it's for me Christian books and podcasts and things. And the reality is that most people in the world aren't making those things because everybody doesn't have an opportunity to make those things. Like you're making financial software, you're making financial plans. Well, you were making financial plans. Now you more guide people to make financial plans because that's kind of a little bit probably something you don't enjoy as much. But all that to say, it is more relational. And so as we're making whatever we're making, the key as a relational faith, which I love that you said that, like our relationship with Jesus drives our faith. Our relationship with others is obviously the thing that we're impacting through our relationship with Jesus. It's a relational life and ministry. And so, I think about this verse, Paul says it in 2 Corinthians chapter 3, talking to the church in Corinth. He says, "You yourselves are our letter, written on our hearts, known and read by everyone. You should know that you are a letter from Christ, the result of our ministry, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not on tablets of stone, but on tablets of human hearts." 2 Corinthians 3, verses 2 and 3. What an incredible verse that Paul's reminding the Corinthian church that their lives are a letter and that his heart's connecting with their hearts are basically connected through the Spirit of Christ. And anyway, just a really beautiful reminder. But take us back, Ben. You were talking about basically the transition between what is now this new life that you've been in for 3 months. And I should remember that because I drove the U-Haul with you from Jersey to here. But just go back to that thought for a second, from where you are now, where you were, and just jump back into that.
Yeah, so I think as I said, about 8 years ago, actually going all the way back to 2012, I was, I think you alluded to, I was working at Goldman Sachs in their wealth management group, doing wealth management for high net worth individuals, and decided to leave there and join another guy. We were living in southern New Jersey, which is where Jonathan and I grew up. Living in southern New Jersey, I joined another business partner. His name is Jeff Jones in a financial planning and investment business. And it was my first sort of jaunt into entrepreneurship and just he had already started a business, but I became his partner. It was just the two of us. And so we were building a business and having he had already had some success, and I was having some early success with him. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to take some more risk, and I'm going to spin some software out of the company that we were building and start a second company. And so for really the last, up until March, it was about a 7.5 year period where I was building a technology startup focused on personal financial planning software that we licensed to financial advisors. And, I love listening to podcasts, and some of the podcasts I listen to are, just about startup journeys and entrepreneurship and building businesses. And it can be a rough journey. And for me, it was a rough journey. We raised some money from some individuals that not institutional investors, but high net worth individuals to start this company. Nearly $1 million raised, and I spent the first 3 or 4 years focused full time on trying to start this business while also keeping the other business up and going, which is still a successful business that I'm a part of today, which is a work of God in and of itself. But
while also managing family and doing the thing.
In a busy period. I mean, I quit my job at Goldman Sachs a month after my first daughter Faith was born, and so
a lot of money to leave.
Yeah. So anyway, it was this period of, you're when you're building a new company, a startup, a technology business, you have no idea how capital intensive that can be. You think, oh, you raised $1 million, that's a lot of money, but that doesn't last very long. It doesn't provide very much for, the software engineers that you need. And so we were, my wife and I found ourselves in this period where I'm trying to build this company. She had left her job as a teacher to raise our 3 kids, which, thankfully we, from a personal financial standpoint, we were doing okay. And so, long story short, we found ourselves in this period of just really waiting for a breakthrough and waiting for, at times that was this waiting spiritually for this breakthrough. At times this is, in our own impatience, waiting for, sort of some personal breakthrough. But I'll never forget when COVID started. And by the way, at some point I took a full-time job running sales and marketing for another startup. So at this point I'm involved in 3 businesses, and this technology startup that I built had gone from being full-time to just kind of keeping the lights on, trying to keep the business open. And right when COVID started, I was doing pretty well in that. In the third role, my first business was growing pretty quickly, but I just couldn't let this startup thing go. I knew that God had me where He wanted me. He had given me a passion for that for some reason, and I was just determined to keep the lights on. And there was this commitment to our investors, and so long story short, when COVID started, I remember it was actually a perfect time for me to I just had less commute time. I wasn't driving 45 minutes or an hour each morning and evening. And so I had more time to just really sit down and do devotions early in the morning. And I remember very specifically one morning, and I was actually trying to find the devotion. I think it was about a year ago. I was doing a devotion and it led me to Isaiah 41. In Isaiah 41:18, it says, "I will open rivers in high places and fountains in the midst of these valleys. I will make the wilderness a pool of water and the dry land springs of water." And at the time, I'd felt like everything was very dry. I was kind of going through the motion, keeping the lights on, and that verse just spoke to me, and it was confirming for me that God had me waiting for Him to do exactly that. And I had no idea how He was going to do it, but I was certain that He would do it. And you fast forward 6 or 7 months, I'm introduced to this other West Point grad here in Colorado through my best friend that lives here in Colorado, my classmate Greg. It's 3 months after that we're actually having dialogue about them specifically looking for the type of company that I had built, and them wanting to buy the company and move us here to Colorado. And it was literally every bit of, making a pool of water out of the wilderness and dry land, turning that into springs of water. It just complete turnaround from a circumstantial standpoint. So being here in Colorado is we never expected to move. I had spent the last 2 years before that personally. We said, we're just going to stay in this house that we've been in for 10 years. And we started, I painted the outside of our house during COVID in the summer, and we redid a bathroom, and we had gotten to a point where we were sort of content. We kind of let things go, and in my heart of hearts, I believe God was waiting for me to kind of let things go and trust Him and believe that He was in control of things, not me.
Yeah, it's interesting because as I think about like your life in general, you were in a very content place, but there were things like, even when I think about, first of all, from work perspective, I know they wanted the entrepreneurial thing to go, and there were lots of other potential opportunities for your business to partner or to be bought out or different things, which would have been good, and they never came through. And then even your family from like a church perspective, like you guys it never seemed like you hit a place where you were fully humming relationally, church-wise, just like all the things community-wise that you would want. And what's really beautiful is here, you said this made the statement to me that somehow, some way, it seems like every single door is opening up in every area of your life. Things are changing in a really beautiful way, which you wouldn't expect when you move to a new state where you have literally one relationship.
Yeah.
Which is all you had.
Yeah, no, it's been pretty amazing to watch. We got here and immediately, we moved into our new home. We were here for 6 weeks in an Airbnb, and that was a bit of a trial, a small Airbnb with 3 kids and 2 dogs. But
as you can hear the dogs in the background. It's COVID now, so dogs are acceptable in podcasts.
Well, they're acceptable in Colorado. Colorado, they're everywhere. But we moved into our new home. I had hired some movers to help me pack the truck and move it from storage, and we're sitting having Panda Express boxes all over the place. It's 7 p.m. our first night in our home, and our new neighbors who we had not met, never seen, knock on the door with their 3 kids. And they told us, we've been praying for you. I know you don't know it, but we've been praying for good neighbors. And that was the welcome to the neighborhood that we got. And it was just like...
They turned out to be full-on believers.
Yeah, and they're friends. And, actually we're supposed to go to their church and visit their church last week. And that didn't end up happening. But that's, that's sort of what this journey has looked like along the way. God just opening doors and making things so easy throughout this entire move. And I can't give any other reason for it other than this was, predestined for us to be here. And I have no idea why, no idea how the journey with this new business is going to go. No idea what the next, week, month, let alone year or decade look like. But, at the end of the day, I don't really, not really worried about it. So we're here for the journey and excited to be in the place we're in. And there's certainly joy in the moment, and I'm sure there'll be strife as well at some point.
Yeah. Well, if you had to answer the question, so I always like to summarize, either I asked the question before the story or I asked the question after the story for a summary. Like, how would you summarize God's rescue of you? How has God rescued you, Benjamin Pitts?
Yeah, so I wouldn't actually... This is not I don't think that's the rescue
story.
Of me.
Oh, great.
No.
Great. We got more to talk about then.
I think that's a blessing story. At the end of the day, despite that sort of dry, wilderness that I feel like we've been in, I was very much kind of plugged into sort of the process, and we weren't depressed or upset or, we were very content. I was content to continue working for that startup that I was working with. And I just had this startup on the side that I was just, I had to make this decision. Do I shut it down and just move on with life, or do we, do I hold out? And,
it talks about in Jeremiah, like, seek the welfare of the city you've been placed in. Like, I feel like that's what you were doing. You're just seeking the welfare of your neighbors, your community. You're doing all the things.
And frankly, my investors who put money into the company. So it was, there was that commitment. But I honestly don't look at that as a rescue story. My rescue story, I think, goes back to, really, actually, it's about 10 years ago now. So as early in my marriage, I guess I'll go back. So, Jonathan and I were raised in a Christian home. You had, mother and a father that were married, love each other, love the Lord, and we were blessed from that perspective. And I kind of look at that phase in our lives of middle school through high school as being, Christians that were performing well, right? We had, in youth group and doing well, very protected. And then I went off to college, and this is where John and I actually ended up, leaving each other for the first time. And I went off to West Point, and I would look at our, college years as being sort of this eye-opening experience and figuring out how do we balance this Christianity that we've grown up in with this new world where we have choices to make. Not that we didn't have those choices when we were younger, but those choices were easy because we had
you had to make it.
Father that was a disciplinarian. But those choices became harder. And so I was at West Point, so it's college and Army. And, for the most part, I feel like I performed okay there, from a Christian perspective, kind of kept that Christian hat on, one leg a little bit in the world. But I, did okay there, I guess, from a judgmental perspective. And then I was medically discharged from the Army. So my plan was to be in the Army for 30 years, be an officer in the Army. And my senior year, I was discharged. And I think that was sort of a pivotal moment for me that pushed me out into this, into this business world that I had no idea what was going to be or what that was all about. And I would look at my 20s as being really a tough time. When I talk to people today, I say I think that your 20s are your hardest years because you're really just trying to figure out who you are. And so I went into 4 different jobs in the course of 5 years. And
your first job was managing like a glass factory plant.
Yeah, 15 guys on a plant floor, and I remember watching the clock every second for about 6
Nothing
months.
wrong with that, just not right for you.
Not for me. When they laid me off because the company was struggling financially, it was a breath of fresh air. But anyway, the last job I had before I ended up going back to business school full time at the University of Virginia was actually working in a casino at Harrah's in Atlantic City, which, looking back at, it's probably the one career decision I made. I wouldn't say I regret it. I learned a lot, but I made the decision for the wrong reason. I literally made that decision because of the paycheck.
Yeah, it's director of customer service, big job.
Yeah, out over my skis for sure in that role. But the head of customer service for the hotel and the casino and kind of everything that process or culture that touched people, I was in charge of. I learned a ton, but ultimately that was, I think, I would say the roughest period of my life, where I was probably entered this period of what I would call self-destruction. I knew I'd made that decision for the wrong reason. I knew it didn't align with my faith. My behavior.
Not to say that if you work in a casino, you
can't. Yeah, no, not at all. I mean, look, some people are called to work in casinos, and I actually have very good friends that still do today. But for me, it was probably more this self-destruction on a personal perspective than being in a casino. I think that was part of the story for me.
And taking the job to get the money to fund that personal destruction. Nothing drug addict or anything.
It was, relatively speaking, I was still a good Boy Scout, I guess. But but ultimately, I remember actually going and playing poker. I developed this, I like to go play poker in the casino, which, I probably didn't go home and share with our mom or anything like that. But long story short, I ended up leaving that job, quitting the job, going to business school at the University of Virginia for 2 years. And at the time I'm dating my now wife, and life is, just, I would say, uncertain. And long story short, go to business school, end up going back to Southern New Jersey to work for Goldman Sachs, and was there for 3 years before I started the entrepreneurial journey. But in the midst of that, I remember my wife and I had just gotten married. I went on to a bachelor party with some friends from my work in Atlantic City, and ended up at this poker table. And I remember losing enough money that it stung. Right? It wasn't like I didn't go broke or whatever, but it stung. And I remember driving home to my wife. We're newly married, baby on the way, trying to save money to buy a house or whatever, and feeling this incredible guilt and shame for this decision that I made to sit down at this poker table and lose money that we frankly just couldn't afford to lose at that point in our lives. And I remember, my wife giving me immediate grace. I feel this guilt and shame. And I don't know if it was that night, it was probably like a week later, I'm sort of wallowing in this guilt and shame. And I remember waking up in the middle of the night, it's like 3:30 in the morning, picking up my phone. And I had on my mind, for some reason, I don't know if it was from a dream or whatever, God put this in my heart, and it was spiritual maturity. So I literally Google search spiritual maturity, and I end up on this website, and I'm, up at night reading. And I don't know how, it somehow led me to Romans 5:8, or 5:6 through 8, I guess. And you think about this, we grew up in this Christian home, and, certainly I was, saved by grace young. But I think for a lot of us that grow up that way, there's sort of this, at some point you have to realize for yourself what the gospel really means. And Romans 5:8 says, "You see, at just the right time, when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good person someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates his love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us." And I think it was the first time, I always knew I was a sinner, but this was the first time I felt like this terrible, messed up person, ridden with guilt. And it was like, oh, wow, the gospel is actually right for us. It was this aha moment. I didn't disappoint God. It's like, aha, no, I didn't disappoint him. Oh, wow, this is actually why he died. He was expecting me to do this. And it was this, this life-changing moment where, you realize, like, this is the heart of the gospel, this is what this God is all about. And it freed me up. And it was almost like, you go from being this person that has to perform in Christianity to being like, I don't have to perform. Like, this is actually what the gospel is all about. And so, that is the moment in my life where I would say it was like this, I don't want to call it a 180, but probably a 180 from a spiritual perspective. And he rescued me from my own sin, I think that's what God pretty much does for all of us.
Yeah. And I would say another way, he even rescued you from your own self-righteousness. I think and I have the same story.
Absolutely.
Like, mine's a little earlier than yours, but I have the same story of walking in a way, because we grew up in a home, where you know how to do the right thing. And so if you do the right thing more than you do the wrong thing, you kind of measure it and you're like, okay, I'm doing the right thing, which is kind of ironic, being that we should know the gospel better than anybody else. But to know the gospel, I think, is to actually experience the gospel, not to know it cognitively. And so we all get to this point where we learn it experientially, not just cognitively, and it changes our lives. It's interesting when you say that, because I think, one of the differences I realized for you is that decision to, lose the money at the poker table. All of a sudden you realize that your sin doesn't just impact and affect you. It actually impacts and affects others in massive ways. And so there's a level of responsibility you feel for yourself that maybe it's harder to feel like, young 20s or teens, and your decisions you feel like, quote unquote, just affect, obviously they affect more people than just you, but maybe for one of the first times you feel like, oh my gosh, I'm responsible for more than just me. And man, I just appreciate you sharing that really vulnerably. That's I didn't know that story. You never told me.
I don't know for sure that or not.
Yeah.
But, it was probably more of a, I think the thing that John and I have the same DNA, but what makes us most different is he thinks out loud and I think internally. So
it's been trouble sometimes.
I probably know more about his life than he knows about mine. But no, that's totally rescued, totally redeemed.
How's that? I'm just curious, and you maybe never thought about this, and obviously mom and dad did an awesome job of raising us. They were grace-based parents, very grace-based. They weren't. It wasn't like they were telling us you better do this or else.
No, not at all. Mm-mm.
Yeah. So it's funny that we end up with the same desire for self-righteousness that I guess mostly, like, it's so funny. The self-righteousness in us is the same self-righteousness that's in those that are quote unquote in the world. Like, I guess the key is getting beyond your own self-righteousness when you know you need a savior. Like, you're not righteous. There's no one righteous, no, not one. So I guess it's the same journey for everybody, regardless whether you grew up in a Christian home or you grew up in a non-Christian home. The reality is, if you're going to believe the gospel, if you're going to receive Jesus, you're going to receive it because you realize, oh my gosh, I'm not righteous. I can never be righteous.
You realize we're all sinners.
Yeah.
Saved by grace.
All falling short of the glory of God. It's kind of crazy. Simple gospel. But I guess my question for you would be, do you think about when you, in parenting your two girls and your boy, Faith, Grace, Benny, is there anything that you think you'll do different? Or do you just realize that's just going to be a part of their journey? I'm just curious how that impacts you as a parent.
Yeah, I don't know. How sort of that rescue story specifically, or sort of our upbringing and my experience with that.
Yeah, I think reconciling the fact that you grew up in this Christian home, high values, high moral code, still really grace-based, and still coming to the same point they had to come to. I mean, I guess a part of it is just they're going to have to come to that point themselves, and we all come at it different ways, obviously.
Yeah, no, I don't think it'll change, because I think the reality is, I think, and we knew this growing up, I think mom and dad knew they couldn't rescue us. They knew that we would have to have this, our own sort of testimony and gospel story. But ultimately, the biblical principles that we were raised with kept us out of a lot of trouble when we were younger.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, me having what many people would think of as a pretty
clean, sober life.
Pretty clean life, and they ended up at this poker table. Oh, whoop-de-doo. At the end of the day, I think that's still a blessing for us to grow up that way, where that's the worst of what happened. Like, my life wasn't at risk. I wasn't, so no, I don't think I'll change the way I raise my kids at all. I hope I can do as good of a job as our parents did.
Wow. It's interesting that I've been talking about this with my fiance, with Peta, about the reality of, like, when you put boundaries in place around your life, the boundaries are there to keep you from getting really close to the edge of any mistake, right? So if you set up multiple boundaries, you're not going to get very close to the edge. Or if you have no boundaries at all, you're going to go over that edge really fast. And we just grew up with tons of boundaries. And for us, I think because the moral compass, code, all that was so high, it did create these guardrails and these fences that would keep us like, we could go like, I'll never forget, like me having my first drink in college. I had a shot of Goldschlager, and you're looking at me disappointed as ever at this Christmas party. Like we're back from college at this high school party, and you're just looking at me with this look just like of sheer disappointment. And I just feel this wave of shame come over me. Sadly, it didn't stop me from going further towards the edge, but ultimately you're right. Like the boundaries that were in place were boundaries that kept us from probably some real, I guess, just what you'd call consequences in life, that the wages of sin is death, like less death in our lives than.
Yeah. I think that the entire time, like even as you're having that drink of Goldschlager, which is nasty, by the way.
It's my first time admitting that publicly, by the way.
At the end of the day, I do feel strongly that was a healthy fear of God that was in us, that, that our parents had helped to, cultivate. Yeah. So it was, I think it's not just a biblical principle. It was a real fear of God, knowing God is real, knowing He is in control of our lives. Like no matter where I was, even through all that, I still knew there was a God, and, that Jesus was real. And it wasn't like that was just like theoretical to me. It was very real. And so I think the way our parents raised us absolutely gave us that foundation. We still have to have that, internalization of that at some point. Mm-hmm. So no, I don't think I'll raise my kids. Hopefully I don't raise my kids any differently. So I think we all turned out okay.
Yeah. So, this is the last thing I'll say. I guess the way I would say it is the reality is fear of God is really important, but without understanding the love of God, the fear of God does nothing except make you want to just do better. And you don't realize all the while, God's not like, I'm not asking you to do better. I'm asking you to just walk with me.
Right.
And the love of God makes all the difference in the world. Fear of God, love of God, two beautiful things that are necessary in the life of a believer. But Ben, thanks for joining the podcast. I really appreciate you being really transparent just about your life. And I think the thing that you said that will stick with me more than anything else leaving this podcast is that the gospel, that life with Jesus, is really relational. So it does matter less about the widgets we're making, the content we're creating, the thing we're doing. Like even like talking about Harrah's, like it was less about you working at the casino. Sorry if I was supposed to say the name, but working at the casino, and more about the why you chose that, which wasn't obviously because you felt like the Holy Spirit was telling you to go work at Harrah's. It was about, I'm going to get this paycheck. And just the reality of like being so in tune with the Holy Spirit, being so in tune with God that you're making decisions out of relationship with Him, which then drives your why with other people. So now like you're not in a more quote unquote holy business. You're in the world of finance. It's you're out there in the world. It's capitalism, all the things. And the reality is there's a way to live as a believer that is different than the way to live as a non-believer in that world, in that creation of content, widgets, whatever the things are. And so thanks for the reminder of the reality of the difference the relationship makes as we walk with the Lord, with our kiddos, with our spouses, with our coworkers, all that. But thanks again. Any last words?
No, not at all. I'll leave it to you, as always. Thanks for having me.
Enjoyed it. Well, I hope you enjoyed the conversation that I had with my identical twin brother, Benjamin Pitts. It was a pleasure to sit down with him and, just honestly learn from a guy who would say, ultimately he's learned a lot from me in ministry. I've learned so much from him in terms of like not always doing, but being. Ben is a beer. And he does a lot, but he's a beer in his faith. And so anyway, I hope that you enjoyed the conversation. Hey, if you enjoyed the podcast, if you enjoyed this episode, if you've enjoyed multiple episodes, I would love if you would consider leaving us a review and just being really honest with me about what it is that you like. Be honest with the community about what it is that you like and what value there is in it for you. And also if you would consider sharing it just through social media with your friends, with your family. Would love to just get the message of God's rescue, of God's people out to more people that need to hear it and be encouraged. God bless you, and until next time, Godspeed.